On October 25, 2016, an afternoon that would forever change the history of Brits Provincial Hospital, paramedic Maurice de Beer was organizing his ambulance in the parking lot after dropping off a patient. His routine work was interrupted by the abrupt arrival of a pickup truck, from which Cobus Kokemoer jumped out carrying a child. Cobus ran through the parking lot, screaming for help. In his arms lay the motionless body of a 3-year-old girl wearing nothing but underwear. Right behind him, his wife Louisa followed hurriedly, holding the hand of a 5-year-old boy, Poppie's brother. De Beer, recognizing the urgency of the situation, immediately abandoned his tasks and ran toward them. The experienced paramedic instantly noticed the child's bluish lips, a clear sign that she hadn't been breathing for some time. Without hesitation, De Beer took the girl from Kokemoer's arms and ordered the family to follow him, running toward the emergency room. While Cobus and Louisa accompanied the paramedic, Poppie's young brother was brought along, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Upon reaching the emergency room, De Beer placed little Poppie's body on the first available stretcher and called for medical assistance. When he tried to initiate resuscitation procedures, he made a disturbing discovery. The girl's body already showed rigidity. Rigor mortis had begun. Dr. Richard Gumba, who arrived next, encountered a scene that would mark him forever. The body of a 3-year-old child covered in bruises from head to toe. On her forehead, pronounced swelling indicated severe recent trauma. The medical team, even knowing it was too late, meticulously documented every mark on the girl's body through photographs, evidence that would later prove crucial. Most shocking to the healthcare professionals was that there was practically no area of the child's body that didn't show some type of injury. It was at this moment that Dr. Gumba made the decision that would initiate the criminal investigation. Taking Kokemoer to his office, he informed him that he was calling the police. Despite Kokemoer's protests insisting this wasn't necessary, the doctor remained firm in his decision, making the call that would begin the search for justice for Poppie. And now comes the most shocking part of this story. You won't believe who was really behind this brutality against an innocent child. The evidence that emerged afterward left all of South Africa in a state of shock. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take this opportunity to subscribe now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any cases like this. In the frenzied environment of Brits Provincial Hospital, while doctors tried to deal with the tragedy that had just arrived, a small figure remained quiet in a corner. Poppie's brother, only 5 years old. The boy, pale and visibly shaken, huddled against the wall, trying to make himself invisible amid the chaos. Paramedic Maurice de Beer, noticing the frightened child, approached gently. Crouching down to meet the boy's eye level, he asked what had happened to his sister. The child kept his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding any eye contact, his body tense with palpable fear. His response, when it finally came, was pronounced in a low but clear voice. Poppie didn't want to eat her food. The simplicity of the phrase contrasted drastically with the gravity of the situation around him. The boy remained silent after that, still refusing to look at anyone. The healthcare professionals observed that the boy himself showed signs of trauma. He would flinch at the slightest movement and kept his arms crossed over his chest protectively. His body language communicated a silent terror that spoke louder than any words. At that critical moment in the hospital, Poppie's young brother became a silent witness, his presence and behavior telling a story that he wasn't yet ready to fully verbalize. Here was a child who had clearly witnessed events that no child should ever have to witness. Dr. Hat Simon, responsible for Poppie van der Merwe's autopsy, faced one of the most distressing tasks of his career in examining the body of the 3-year-old girl. The report produced would reveal a disturbing history of systematic violence. The external examination of the body showed a complex pattern of injuries. The bruises found presented different colorations and healing stages, some purple and recent, others greenish and yellowish, indicating they were inflicted at different times over a period. This discovery was crucial in establishing that the abuse wasn't an isolated incident. The most concerning region was the skull. The lower left corner showed extensive blood accumulation, consistent with one or more significant impacts. Detailed analysis of this area revealed that the trauma could have been caused either by direct blows or by impact against a solid surface. The girl's body showed abrasions distributed in a non-random pattern, concentrated mainly on the face, chest, and thighs. The location and pattern of these injuries were inconsistent with typical childhood accidents or normal play. Some marks suggested they were caused by specific objects, while others indicated trauma from direct impact. The internal examination revealed even more evidence of accumulated trauma. The deep tissues showed signs of old injuries in the healing process, confirming that the abuse had occurred over a prolonged period. Dr. Simon's report was categorical. The physical evidence unequivocally pointed to a case of deliberate and prolonged physical abuse. Based on the different healing stages of the injuries, he estimated that systematic abuse had occurred for several months before the fatal incident. The official conclusion of the cause of death was severe cranial trauma, resulting from one or more significant impacts to the head. The report made it clear that this wasn't an isolated accident, but rather the tragic outcome of a long period of violence. In the small community of Orania, where houses are close together and walls are thin, Yakaru became an involuntary witness to the nightmare unfolding next door. As the Kokmoor's direct neighbor, he documented a series of disturbing incidents that would later become crucial evidence. Initially, Yaku noticed that the family was quite reserved and quiet. However, after a few months, the sounds that came through the walls began to tell a different story. Screams and cursing directed at the children became frequent, especially at night. One of the most disturbing episodes that Yaku witnessed occurred during winter. On a particularly cold day, he observed Kobus using a hose to drench the children with ice-cold water in the backyard. Even more shocking, the children were forced to remain naked outdoors until their clothes dried naturally, shivering and crying from cold. The nights were especially distressing. Yaku reported that Poppie frequently woke up with nightmares, her screams of terror echoing through the neighborhood. These episodes could last up to 30 minutes, with the girl crying softly until finally falling asleep again, apparently receiving no comfort. On one particular occasion, after hearing an especially heated argument, Yaku heard a loud thud followed by screams of pain. The next day, he saw Poppie with a large bruise on her head and noticed she kept her arm pressed against her chest. When he questioned Kobus about the injuries, he reacted with fury and refused to provide explanations. Yaku observed that when Poppie appeared with casts or other visible injuries, none of the adults offered any assistance to the child. She was forced to carry her own backpack and climb into the family's pickup truck by herself, even with visible difficulty moving. Yaku's observations also included moments when he heard Louisa instructing Kobus to discipline the children, followed by sounds of impact and crying. The pattern of abuse seemed to increase over time, with incidents becoming more frequent and more severe. At the local daycare in Orania, staff began to notice subtle but worrying changes in the behavior and physical appearance of the Kokmoor children. What initially appeared to be isolated incidents soon transformed into a disturbing pattern of warning signs that, tragically, didn't receive due attention. Johan, Poppie's older brother, developed particularly alarming behavior. Every time Kobus and Louisa came to pick up the children, the boy would instinctively run to hide in the bathroom. Teachers noticed how his entire body would tense up at the sound of his stepfather's voice, and how he would flinch at the slightest sudden movement from adults around him. One of the most troubling signs was how Johan dressed. Even on the hottest days, he would appear wearing heavy jackets and long-sleeved clothes that clearly weren't his. They seemed too big or inappropriate for the season. When teachers gently suggested he remove his coat due to the heat, the boy would vehemently refuse, saying he would get in trouble with Kobus and Mommy if he did. With Poppie, the signs were different but equally concerning. The girl began appearing with bruises in unusual places on her body, especially on her ear lobes and feet. Most alarming was that new bruises would appear before the old ones had time to heal, creating a continuous pattern of injuries. When questioned about the injuries, Kobus and Louisa always had ready explanations. Sometimes they blamed rough play between the siblings. Other times they said Poppie was naturally clumsy. On one particular occasion, when confronted about an especially visible bruise on Poppie's face, Kobus went so far as to suggest that the daycare staff were drugging the children to keep them calm, because according to him, at home, they were completely different. Curiously, after a while, Johan was withdrawn from daycare, while Poppie continued attending. The coke mowers justified the decision by claiming the boy had aggressive outbursts, something the teachers had never witnessed, describing him, on the contrary, as a sweet and loving child. One morning in September 2016, the residents of Orania woke up to a disturbing discovery. The coke mower family had disappeared during the night. The house that previously sheltered Cobus, Louisa, and the children was strangely silent. The lights, which normally illuminated the family's morning routine, remained off. The escape was meticulously planned to happen in the darkest hours, when the vigilant eyes of the small community were closed. The coke mowers had packed their essential belongings and departed without leaving traces or warnings. Neighbors reported hearing the sound of a pickup truck during the early morning hours, around 2 a.m., and the noise of doors being carefully closed. What made the situation even more suspicious was how they left. Cobus hadn't given any prior notice or resignation letter at his job at the local supermarket. He simply stopped showing up. His co-workers found his locker empty, without any explanation. The daycare that Poppie attended received no notification about her departure. The girl's personal belongings were still in her cubby, including a small coat she regularly wore. In the rush of the nighttime departure, they left behind furniture and larger belongings. The house still held signs of a hasty departure. Half-open drawers, some toys scattered about, and even food in the refrigerator. A neighbor noticed that the trash bin hadn't been put out that collection night, something the family never forgot to do. The family had moved to Brits, an agricultural community located almost 8 hours away from Orania. The choice of destination seemed calculated. A city big enough to get lost in the crowd, but small enough to avoid too many questions. The significant distance between the two cities suggested a clear desire to cut any connection with their previous life. In Brits, they found shelter at a local farm called Mambukulskrel. The location offered the isolation they apparently sought, away from the watchful eyes they had left behind in Orania. The rural property, with its dirt roads and distant neighbors, provided the perfect environment for a family that seemed determined to disappear from the radar. When Sergeant Gift Madhome received the call from Brits Provincial Hospital that fateful October afternoon in 2016, he couldn't have imagined he was about to face one of the most impactful cases of his police career. As the father of a 13-month-old child, what he found at the hospital would deeply shake him. The sergeant's first contact with the case wasn't directly with Poppie's body, but with photographs. Dr. Gumba, demonstrating professional sensitivity, decided to first show the officer the images that the medical team had documented. Even being an experienced investigator, Madhome couldn't contain his tears upon seeing the state of the 3-year-old girl. "In my entire career," he would later say, "I've never seen such a young child look so broken." Regaining his professional composure, Madhome immediately initiated standard investigative procedures. His first step was to isolate the area where the body was received at the hospital, ensuring that all physical evidence was preserved. He coordinated a team to meticulously photograph and document every detail of the location, including the clothes Poppie was wearing when she arrived. The sergeant conducted the initial interviews following a specific methodology for suspected death cases involving children. He decided to interview Cobus and Louisa separately, an investigative technique that frequently reveals discrepancies in the presented versions. He set up in different hospital rooms for each interview, ensuring there was no communication between the suspects. During the interview with Cobus, Madhome noticed significant inconsistencies in the account. The suspect claimed that Poppie had simply fainted while watching television, but his nervous gestures and changes in the story while speaking alerted the experienced investigator. The sergeant maintained a calm and professional tone, allowing Cobus to speak freely while documenting each contradiction. The interview with Louisa presented a different pattern. Initially, she basically repeated the same story as Cobus, but when Madhome specifically questioned her about the large bruise on Poppie's forehead, she began to modify her account. The sergeant noticed that she avoided eye contact when talking about the moments that preceded her daughter's death. A crucial aspect of the initial investigation was how Madhome handled Poppie's brother. Aware of the trauma that the child had experienced, he requested the presence of a child psychologist specialized in domestic violence cases to assist in collecting the boy's testimony. The sergeant knew that the child's testimony would be fundamental, but needed to be obtained in an appropriate and sensitive manner. Madame also coordinated the preservation of crucial evidence. He organized the transport of the body for the post-mortem examination, ensuring that the chain of custody remained intact. He personally supervised the collection of tissue samples and detailed forensic photographs, knowing that every detail could be crucial to the case. The sergeant's experience in domestic violence cases led him to immediately expand the investigation beyond the fatal incident. He initiated a detailed survey of Poppie's medical history, requesting records from all medical facilities in the region. He also began mapping the family's recent movements, particularly their sudden move from Orania to Brits. As the first hours of the investigation unfolded, Matteau made a crucial decision. Even with time pressure, he insisted on following each protocol meticulously. His experience told him that cases involving children's deaths frequently got lost in the courts due to failures in initial procedures. He ensured that each document was properly filled out, each photograph adequately cataloged, and each testimony appropriately recorded. By the end of that first day of investigation, Matteau had already gathered sufficient evidence to determine that Poppie's death hadn't been a simple accident. Based on the inconsistencies in the statements, the physical evidence, and the preliminary testimony of the victim's brother, he ordered Kobus's immediate arrest. However, his investigative intuition told him there was more to the story than appeared at first glance. During the initial interviews at Brits Provincial Hospital, Kobus Kokmoer and Louisa presented explanations that not only contradicted each other but also changed as they were questioned, weaving a complex web of inconsistencies that would soon begin to unravel. Kobus's initial version was apparently simple. Poppie was watching television when she simply fainted. According to him, the girl was lying on a rug in front of the TV when she stopped responding. However, when pressed about the details, his narrative began to show significant gaps. He couldn't explain why he didn't immediately call an ambulance, opting instead to put the girl in the back of the pickup truck. Questioned about the numerous bruises on Poppie's body, Kobus offered an explanation that doctors considered implausible. He claimed that all the injuries had appeared during the journey to the hospital. According to him, the girl's body had bounced in the truck bed due to the potholed roads. This explanation completely ignored the fact that the bruises showed different stages of healing. Louisa, in turn, initially supported her husband's version, but her story began to change significantly during questioning. At a crucial moment, she revealed that, in fact, the day before Poppie's death, Kobus had slammed the girl's head against a cabinet. This admission opened a new line of questioning. Pressed about Poppie's condition on the morning of October 25th, Louisa described her daughter as half awake and half sleeping. According to her, the girl was lethargic, refusing to eat and barely speaking. However, even noticing this abnormal state of the child, no medical help was sought. One of the most disturbing aspects of Louisa's account emerged when she mentioned that Kobus, upon returning from shopping that day, had kicked Poppie in the stomach. She described this act with unsettling detachment, stating that this was normal and that it happened frequently. When questioned about Poppie's reaction to the kick, Louisa said she couldn't remember if the girl had cried. The couple also presented a bizarre explanation for Poppie's behavior, claiming that she often pretended to be dead. According to them, the girl had episodes where she would stop breathing and needed to be shaken to come back to herself. This claim would later be contested by all professionals who had regular contact with the child. The sequence of events described by Louisa became increasingly disturbing. She reported that after the kick to the stomach, Kobus asked her to get the groceries from the car. Upon returning, Poppie was no longer on the rug where she had left her. According to her, Kobus had said that Poppie is playing dead again. Louisa claimed to have found Poppie in the bathroom with blue lips. She said she tried to perform mouth-to-mouth CPR, but without success. Kobus, according to her, tried to wake up the girl by throwing water in her face. When nothing worked, they decided to take her to the hospital, but not in their arms or in the car's back seat, but rather in the bed of the pickup truck. The contradictions in the couple's stories extended even to the most basic events of that day. While Kobus insisted that Poppie was fine until suddenly fainting, Louisa admitted that the girl had been visibly unwell throughout the day. While he claimed that the injuries were recent and accidental, she let slip details of previous abuse. One of the most glaring inconsistencies was how each described Poppie's normal behavior. Kobus portrayed her as a problematic child who frequently played tricks by pretending to be dead. Louisa, in moments of apparent sincerity, described episodes of abuse that directly contradicted this characterization. The versions presented by Kobus and Louisa about the day of Poppie's death were full of contradictions. While Kobus insisted that the girl simply fainted while watching television, Louisa revealed that, in fact, the day before, he had slammed the child's head against a cabinet. The stepfather claimed that the bruises appeared during the trip to the hospital, while the mother admitted that he used to kick Poppie in the stomach frequently. But how did a child of just 3 years end up in the hands of people capable of such brutality? The answer lies in a series of events that began long before her birth. On August 9, 2013, in the Westernaria region of South Africa, a girl with blonde hair and blue eyes was born who would receive the name Louisa Cornelia Susanna van der Merwe, affectionately called Poppie. Her birth, which should have marked the beginning of a promising life, occurred amid a family cycle of violence that had already lasted generations. Her mother, Louisa, carried deep emotional scars. At 10 years old, in 1984, she lost her biological father, and the stepfather who entered her life proved to be abusive both physically and emotionally. At 18 years old, in an attempt to escape, Louisa married Freddie Else, having 2 children with him, Yaku and Marlies. This marriage also proved abusive, and only with the help of her mother Susan did she manage to leave it. The encounter with Christo van der Merwe, a diesel mechanic, seemed promising. From this relationship came Johan and, 2 years later, Poppie. However, in 2014, when Poppie was just 1 year old, Louisa once again found herself forced to flee from an abusive relationship. She managed to get a restraining order against Christo, limiting his contact with the children to 3 supervised visits in 2 years and telephone calls on Sundays. Seeking a fresh start, Louisa moved with the children to Orania, a small town of about 1,000 inhabitants in Northern Cape. The community, exclusively white and of Dutch descent, seemed to offer the refuge she so desperately sought. A social worker, Heidi Smith, helped establish the family, securing employment for Louisa at a local supermarket and spots at the daycare for the children. It was at this supermarket that Louisa met Kobus Kookmoer, newly arrived in town, and with his own history of failed marriages. After a brief period of dating, they married on November 14, 2015. The day after the wedding, the first drastic change occurred. Marlies, then 14 years old, who acted as the primary caregiver for her younger siblings, was abruptly sent to live with her biological father in the Eastern Cape. Marlies' departure left a deep void in the children's lives, who often called her Mommy. In her place came a stepfather who showed little interest in developing any emotional bond. Soon after the marriage, Louisa left her job, increasing the family's isolation and their financial dependence on Kobus. It was at this moment that the protection system began to systematically fail. Orania, due to its small size, did not have its own police station. Any complaint needed to be made in Hope Town, 42 kilometers away. This physical distance would become a crucial barrier to protecting the children. At Brits Provincial Hospital, after examining Poppie's body and hearing the couple's conflicting versions, Sergeant Gift Matome made the immediate decision to arrest Kobus Kookmoer. The physical evidence was overwhelming, and the explanations offered by Kobus about the bruises, claiming they had appeared during the journey to the hospital, were clearly implausible. Initially, Louisa was treated as a possible victim of domestic violence and released to return home with her son. This decision would later be re-evaluated when the autopsy results arrived in December 2016. The report revealed not only the extent of abuse that Poppie had suffered, but also evidence that the mistreatment was systematic and long-lasting. On December 15, 2016, Louisa Kookmoer was finally arrested. The investigation had discovered that she wasn't merely a passive spectator, but an active participant in the abuse. Her own admission that kicks to Poppie's stomach were normal and happened frequently weighed significantly against her. Louisa's arrest happened discreetly, contrasting with Kobus's public and tumultuous detention. When the police came to get her, she still tried to maintain the narrative that she was just a frightened mother who couldn't oppose her violent husband. However, the accumulated evidence, including testimonies from neighbors and daycare staff, painted a very different picture. The path to the courthouse was long and tortuous. Initially, the process faced various obstacles that delayed the trial for almost a year. No lawyer wanted to represent the couple, such was the revulsion caused by the case. The defenders felt a deep contempt for the accused and refused to work with them. Meanwhile, Kobus Kukumar experienced difficult moments in prison. He tried to take his own life twice, once by cutting his wrists with a sharp object and on another occasion by drinking a bottle of cleaning product. These suicide attempts only served to delay the inevitable and prolong the suffering. The trial finally began in October 2017 in the Kayateng court, almost a year after Poppie's death. The charges were serious: murder of Poppie and abuse against the other children in the family. During the process, Kobus presented a distorted version of events. He claimed he only disciplined the children, hitting their hands and buttocks with a wooden spoon. He tried to minimize the brutality of his actions, even stating that Poppie had episodes where she would lie looking at the ceiling and sometimes stop breathing, which they called playing dead. Louisa, in turn, adopted a victimization strategy. She admitted that Kobus abused the children but insisted that she was too afraid to confront him. She denied instructing any aggression, despite evidence to the contrary. The most crucial testimony came from Poppie's brother, then 6 years old, who testified through a remote camera. He described terrifying scenes of abuse, including a specific episode on the day of Poppie's death, when Kobus had allegedly drowned the girl in the toilet, flushing it in an attempt to wake her up. Judge Bert Bam couldn't contain his indignation. He saw not only the defendants' cruelty, but also their complete indifference regarding what they had done. To the magistrate, the couple seemed concerned only with their own fate and the punishment they would face. In May 2018, the moment for sentencing finally arrived. Louisa and Kobus were sentenced to life imprisonment for Poppie's murder. Additionally, they received 10 more years in prison for abuse against the other children in the family. The judge went beyond condemning the couple. He harshly criticized the system that allowed the abuse to continue for so long. Social workers, teachers, and doctors who had examined Poppie were called accomplices in her death. The community of Orania, which tried to cover up the abuse, was also strongly criticized. The sentence represented more than just punishment for Louisa and Kobus. It was a wake-up call about the importance of protecting vulnerable children, recognizing signs of abuse, and acting quickly to interrupt cycles of violence. If you've made it this far, it means this story impacted you as much as it did me. Leave in the comments what you thought of this case. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and share this video so more people can know Poppie's story. See you in the next video.